The secret Solomon hid about money, that no one wants you to know, you've been chasing the wrong thing your entire life. And the worst part is, you were trained to, not by accident, by design. They told you that wealth is about money, that if you work hard enough, save long enough, and suffer quietly, you'll eventually arrive at freedom. They told you to trust the system, respect authority, stay humble, and never question the map. And when the destination never came, you blamed yourself. You thought maybe you weren't disciplined enough, smart enough, lucky enough. But what if the destination was never real to begin with? What if the map was designed to keep you walking in circles? King Solomon was considered the richest man who ever lived. But that's not the secret. The secret is why he became the richest. What he understood about value, identity, and power, and what he deliberately didn't teach. Because some knowledge was never meant to be given to the masses, not because it was too sacred, but because it was too dangerous. Dangerous to a world built on control. You've heard the stories. Solomon asked God not for money, not for fame, but for wisdom. And that one decision unlocked everything. But what most people miss is what he did with that wisdom, and why. Because Solomon didn't just build a kingdom, he built a system, a framework for wealth that wasn't about gold, but about leverage, not about labor, but about structure. And here's the part they never emphasize. He passed those blueprints to kings, not workers, to rulers, not followers. And that's where the lie begins. Because you were never meant to receive those blueprints. You were meant to obey the ones who did. Think about this. If the wisdom of Solomon could generate empires, peace, and legacy, why isn't it part of your school curriculum? Why don't they teach his decision-making models in business school? Why isn't his understanding of human nature discussed in leadership seminars? Simple. Because if you understood what Solomon knew, you'd stop being manageable. You'd stop thinking like a servant and start building like a sovereign. You weren't trained to rule. You were trained to behave. Solomon mastered what modern systems fear: inner wealth. He understood that power doesn't start with gold coins. It starts with clarity, with alignment, with seeing the game board for what it is, and refusing to be a piece. That's why his prayers weren't for safety. They were for sight. And when you see clearly, you act differently. You speak differently. You negotiate from a place of identity, not insecurity. And the moment you operate from that place, the game changes. Not because the system allows it, but because it can't stop you. But here's the catch. That level of clarity comes at a cost. It demands you unlearn everything the world taught you about worth. Solomon's wisdom was never about information. It was about transformation. It wasn't about reading more. It was about remembering who you were before the noise, before the degrees, before the debt, before the titles that felt like cages, and most importantly, before the script, that invisible program that teaches you how to look successful without ever feeling free. That's the first layer of the secret. Solomon didn't just ask for wisdom. He asked to see what others couldn't. And then he used that vision to build a life that didn't require permission. You weren't taught to ask for that. You were taught to wait for the raise, to wait for the approval, to wait for the right time. All while time is the only thing you'll never get back. So let me ask you this. What would your life look like if you stopped waiting? Not just for money, but for ownership, for meaning, for a story that wasn't handed to you by people who don't live by it themselves. Because here's the second layer of Solomon's secret, and it's the one they really don't want you to hear. Wealth is not something you pursue, it's something you position for. And if you don't understand that difference, you'll spend your entire life chasing, collecting, consuming, without ever becoming. Solomon didn't chase, he aligned. He didn't hustle, he built. And that's what this video is about. Not motivation, not hype, not hustle culture, but a total reprogramming of how you see wealth, identity, and design. Because the truth is, you were never supposed to struggle this much. You were just given a map that leads nowhere. And now, we're going to burn it. One paragraph at a time, one belief at a time, one brick at a time. Let's begin. They never taught you how to think about wealth. They taught you how to behave around it. From the moment you were old enough to count coins, the script began. It wasn't shouted, it was whispered, passed down in habits, reactions, and silent expectations. You heard it when your parents said, "Money doesn't grow on trees." You felt it when a teacher praised your obedience, but never your questions. You absorbed it when you saw people with money treated as suspicious and people without money treated as noble. But noble doesn't pay the rent, and suspicion doesn't build legacy. You were conditioned to see wealth as dangerous, greedy, distant, or reserved for someone else, but never as something you were allowed to own fully. Not spiritually, not practically, not psychologically. And here's the twisted brilliance of the system. It didn't need to chain your body. It just had to train your mind. To equate ambition with arrogance, to link money with shame, to confuse struggle with morality, and the moment you swallowed that script, the trap was set. You started living a life built on permission, waiting for signs, for acceptance, for clarity, for perfect conditions. But Solomon didn't wait, and that's what made him dangerous. See, the real wealth of Solomon wasn't gold. It was the clarity to move without asking. And when you act from that place, the world can't predict you. It can't manage you. It can't profit off your confusion. That's why what he knew had to be hidden, not erased, just buried, not destroyed, just forgotten. Because if too many people remembered it, the system would collapse. The workforce would thin, the consumers would slow down. The dream would stop being for sale because people would start building it themselves. And here's where it gets uncomfortable. You're not tired because you work too hard. You're tired because you're swimming against a current built on illusion. You think you're chasing wealth, but you're actually maintaining a cycle of consuming instead of creating, of planning instead of producing, of researching instead of remembering. They told you to go to school, get the grades, get the job, follow the path. And one day, it will all make sense. But what if it never makes sense because it was never designed to? What if that path is just a loop? What if the ladder you're climbing doesn't go anywhere? Because it was built to keep you climbing? That's the secret you're not supposed to ask about. That's the pattern no one wants to explain. Because if you start seeing it clearly, you might step off it. And if you step off it, you might start building something of your own. And if you build something of your own, you're no longer profitable to them. You're no longer predictable. And here's where Solomon enters again, not as a myth, but as a mirror. He wasn't wealthy because he followed the structure. He was wealthy because he saw through it. He didn't seek money, he sought understanding. Because once you understand how things actually work, you're no longer seduced by how they appear. Let that sink in. This is what they don't want you to remember. This is the knowledge that doesn't fit in textbooks. This is why his true wealth wasn't passed down publicly. It was whispered among rulers, encoded in proverbs, guarded by those who understood its power. And the question is, are you ready to hear it? Because the deeper we go, the more uncomfortable it gets. The more illusions we dismantle, the more responsibility you'll feel, not to the system, but to yourself. Because once you hear what Solomon really understood, once you see the principle he never fully explained, you won't be able to unsee it. And the life you were trained to accept, it'll never feel the same again. So keep watching, keep listening, because soon we'll reach the layer they hoped you'd never dig deep enough to find. The layer that reveals why wealth was never about accumulation, but about alignment. Why power was never in the palace, but in the pattern. Solomon didn't hide the truth to be selfish. He hid it because only those who seek it fully are ready to receive it. And if you're still here, still breathing through the discomfort, still curious even while everything inside you resists, you might be one of them. So stay awake. The next layer will hurt. But what comes after? It might just change everything. Look closer at your life, at what you were taught to celebrate, at what you were rewarded for, at what got you applause, and what got you punished. When you followed rules, you were praised. When you questioned them, you were silenced. When you got good grades, you were safe. When you challenged ideas, you were labeled difficult. And over time, you learned something, not in words, but in muscle memory. That survival comes from obedience, not truth, not brilliance, not clarity, just compliance. And so the cycle began. You didn't chase dreams and you chased safety. You didn't express, you adapted. You didn't listen to your gut, you listened to the program. And that program has a name. It's called the inversion of value. Let me explain. You were taught to value what keeps you small, to pursue degrees that train you to follow, to admire those who conform, not those who disrupt, to seek jobs where your energy builds someone else's vision, to fear failure more than mediocrity. That's not education, that's domestication. And you think it ends at school? No, it's reinforced in every corner of culture. Look at media. The heroes are always those who sacrifice everything to protect a system that wouldn't protect them. Look at religion twisted for control, where humility is weaponized to keep you silent, and ambition is labeled as sin. Look at employment, where loyalty to a brand is praised more than loyalty to your own vision. That's not morality, that's conditioning. And when you finally start to question it, do you notice what happens? The people around you get uncomfortable, not because you're wrong, but because your awakening threatens their comfort. They'll call you impulsive, obsessed, too intense. They'll say, don't take life so seriously, as if mediocrity were a virtue. But Solomon didn't choose mediocrity. He chose wisdom, and wisdom is dangerous to a system built on unconscious loyalty. You were taught to fear danger, but you were never shown that the true danger is in delay, the kind that looks like responsibility but smells like regret. They convinced you that your worth is based on how much you can endure, not how much you can build, that your power is in pleasing others, not in understanding yourself, and that money is a reward, not a reflection of how clearly you see. Solomon knew otherwise. He didn't seek wealth, he sought discernment, and that discernment created order, and that order attracted abundance, not just materially, but structurally, relationally, spiritually. Let's pause here. You may be feeling resistance, tension, maybe even guilt, because what I'm saying goes against everything you were told was noble. But that's the point. The script you were given wasn't written to set you free. It was written to keep you from remembering that you already were. You see, systems don't fear chaos. They fear clarity. They fear the moment when someone stops asking for permission and starts acting from conviction. And that's why Solomon's wealth was so threatening, because it wasn't based on tricks, shortcuts, or exploitation. It was based on order born from inner wisdom, and that can't be taxed, regulated, or outsourced. Now let's be real. How many people do you know who are exhausted but can't stop moving? Who are surrounded but still feel alone? Who earn more but feel emptier? That's not failure. That's a system working exactly as designed, to keep you consuming but never fulfilled, to keep you busy but never aligned, to keep you striving but never arriving. And here's the worst part. It's all dressed up to look like success, a title, a paycheck, a house with rooms you never enter and debt you never stop paying. But Solomon built differently. He didn't build from pressure, he built from positioning, from vision, from stillness before strategy. And that's what no one teaches you anymore. Because in a world addicted to motion, stillness is rebellion, and rebellion is where your real power begins. So take a breath, feel the discomfort. You're not crazy, you're just waking up. And when the fog starts to lift, when you see that the values you inherited were never truly yours, you start to remember something ancient, something royal, something dangerous, that maybe, just maybe, you were never meant to survive this system. You were meant to rebuild it, and that's exactly what Solomon did. But he didn't leave the full blueprint in plain sight. Why? Because the blueprint means nothing until you become the kind of person who can see it. And we're not done, because what comes next isn't theory. It's the beginning of practice, where wealth stops being a dream and starts becoming a decision. Let's get honest. You didn't choose most of what you believe about money, about success, about yourself. You inherited it, not through DNA, but through repetition, through emotional scripting, through 1,000 moments where the people around you, often with good intentions, projected their fears into your future. You were told to be realistic, to not dream too big, to be grateful for what you have, even when what you had was barely enough to breathe. You were taught to shrink early, so you wouldn't disrupt the room, so you wouldn't challenge the teacher, so you wouldn't threaten the balance, and so you adapted. Not because you were weak, but because you were smart, because you learned what kept you safe. But what keeps you safe as a child often keeps you small as an adult. And that's the fracture, because now you're no longer surviving a childhood script, you're sabotaging a future that was never meant to be ordinary. You've outgrown the programming, but the code is still running, and until you rewrite it, Wealth will always feel like something just out of reach. That's what Solomon understood. He knew that external structures don't matter if the internal identity is broken. That's why he didn't ask for more resources. He asked for more revelation. Because once you see differently, you build differently. And once you build differently, you live in a reality most people can't even perceive. Let me ask you something personal. When was the first time you were told you were too much, too loud, too ambitious, too confident, too intense? That moment? That's when the shrinking began. That's when the mask was created. That's when your true identity went underground, buried under layers of performance. And that's where poverty starts. Not in your wallet, but in your willingness to shrink to survive. Solomon never shrank, not because he didn't have fear, but because he operated from assignment, not approval. He didn't wait for applause. He moved with authority. And that's what real wealth is. Not accumulation, but alignment. You were taught to chase worth. He embodied it. And until you do the same, no amount of money will feel like enough, because you'll still be trying to earn with your hands what you never claimed. With your identity. So here's the turning point. Not motivational, not poetic, just honest. If you don't change how you see yourself, nothing you build will feel like yours. And even if success arrives, you'll self-sabotage. You'll downplay it. You'll hide it. You'll feel guilty for it. Because a borrowed identity can't hold authentic wealth. So how do you change that? You don't add more. You remove. You don't become someone new. You unearth the version of you that was buried by the blueprint they gave you. You remove the mask, the one you built to fit in, to survive, to be liked, to be safe, and underneath that, you find the builder, the one who doesn't wait to be chosen, because they already know they were called. This is where everything shifts. Not in your bank account, in your mirror, because until you see yourself as someone who creates, not just consumes, who leads, not just follows, who designs, not just reacts, you'll always feel like you're faking it, but you're not. You're remembering, you're returning, you're reconstructing a throne that was always yours, but that you abandoned to be polite. And now? Now you reclaim it. Not with ego, with clarity, with responsibility, with structure. That's the second secret of Solomon. He didn't just pray. He planned, he documented, he delegated, he systematized the divine. He took what was spiritual and made it strategic. And that's the level they don't teach you, because the system is afraid of spiritual clarity, applied through practical discipline. It's afraid of someone who knows who they are and what they're building, because that person is unstoppable. You're becoming that person. You feel it. You sense it. You might not know exactly how to do it yet, but your soul is louder than your fear now, and that's the beginning of reconstruction. No more identity by default. No more seeking permission. No more outsourcing your vision to people who were never meant to understand it. From this point forward, your life becomes a site of intentional design, and in that space, wealth is inevitable, because it's not the goal anymore. It's the byproduct of alignment. And alignment, that's what Solomon mastered. That's what you're rebuilding now, brick by brick, layer by layer, word by word, decision by decision. And the next decision is yours. Let's make this real. Solomon didn't just become wealthy. He understood wealth as a system operating in 3 distinct levels, and that's the part most people never learn, because if you only chase level 3, you'll never be able to hold it. Most people today live in level 1, strive for level 3, and completely ignore level 2, and that's why they fail. So let's break it down. Let's open the pattern that was never meant to be public, because once you see these 3 levels clearly, your relationship with money, energy, and purpose will never be the same. Level 1. Spiritual wealth, alignment. This is the foundation. It's invisible, internal, often ignored. But without this, nothing you build will stand. This is where Solomon began. When he asked for wisdom, he didn't ask for profit. He asked for perception, a calibrated ability to see what others overlook. He wasn't chasing outcomes, he was seeking alignment. Spiritual wealth isn't about religion. It's about resonance. A soul that doesn't lie to itself, a heart that isn't for sale, a mind that listens before it reacts. It's not loud, it's not trending, it's steady, anchored, immovable, and that's why it's terrifying to a world built on noise. This level isn't sexy. It looks like journaling when everyone's scrolling. It looks like stillness when everyone's rushing. It looks like boundaries that offend people used to your compliance. But it's essential, because if you build from dissonance, you will sabotage your own success, and no coach, tactic, or strategy will save you from a soul out of tune with itself. This is what Solomon understood. The root creates the fruit, and the deeper the root, the higher the tree. So before you chase results, you calibrate resonance. Level 2, mental wealth, discernment. This is the middle layer, where ideas become strategy, where emotion meets intellect, where Solomon thrived. Mental wealth is about decision power. It's the ability to filter noise from truth, to choose with precision, to separate urgency from importance, to think long in a world that rewards the short. This is where you identify patterns, understand timing, design systems. Solomon was known for his judgments, not because he was harsh, but because he was discerning. He could see beyond the surface. That's mental wealth. It's not IQ. It's not academic achievement. It's the muscle of clarity under pressure. Most people collapse here because they never unlearn the thought patterns that sabotage them. They still think like labor, not like leverage. They still see income as a goal, not as a byproduct. They still respond to life instead of designing it. But Solomon, he didn't react. He structured, and structure is sacred. Mental wealth is where your vision becomes a model. It's where prayers become plans, where clarity becomes code. Level 3, material wealth, expression. This is the visible layer, the money, the assets, the abundance. But here's the part no one tells you. Material wealth is the last step, not the first, not the purpose, just the reflection. It's the echo of alignment plus discernment. It's not what you build, it's what happens because you built correctly. This is where Solomon's empires showed up, not because he chased them, but because he structured his life to support them. Wealth wasn't his goal, it was his consequence. And that's your shift. Because when you start with clarity instead of desperation, when you think with structure instead of survival, and when you move from vision instead of fear, wealth follows you. Not because you're lucky, because you're inevitable. Now pause and reflect. What level are you operating from? Be honest. Are you chasing level 3 without anchoring level 1? Are you collecting information but avoiding integration? Are you learning frameworks but never becoming the foundation? Because here's the brutal truth. Without spiritual wealth, you'll build out of ego. Without mental wealth, you'll build without order. And without order, nothing grows. It just exhausts you. Solomon knew that. And that's why he didn't chase influence. It chased him because he became unshakable. And that's what you're building now. So let's go deeper. In the next section, we'll explore how Solomon protected his wealth, not just with treasure rooms and guards, but with something far more powerful: structure. The systems, patterns, disciplines, and boundaries that most people ignore, but that silently decide who multiplies and who burns out. We're not here to fantasize. We're here to architect. And Solomon didn't just understand money. He understood momentum. So let's pick up the next stone. You've laid the foundation. Now we build. Everyone wants to get rich. Almost no one wants to build the structure that makes it sustainable. Because structure isn't sexy. It's quiet, invisible, uncelebrated. It's the discipline that protects the destiny. And Solomon understood this better than anyone. He wasn't the richest because he won a cosmic lottery. He was the richest because he designed a kingdom that didn't need his constant presence to thrive. He built systems, not just palaces. He created infrastructure that multiplied even while he rested. And that's where most people fail. They chase income. Solomon built order. They chase opportunity. He created ecosystems. And here's the secret. Without structure, wealth becomes a burden. Because what you build will demand your presence 24/7 unless you design it to stand without you. So let's break down how Solomon did it, and how you can too. 1. He separated himself from the system he built. This is where most entrepreneurs and dreamers collapse. They build something that revolves around them. They become the engine, the operator, the brand, the identity. So the moment they pause, it dies. That's not freedom. That's a new prison with better furniture. Solomon ruled a kingdom, but he wasn't entangled in every moving part. He appointed leaders, delegated tasks, empowered tribes. He trusted design more than micromanagement. If your system requires you to be everywhere, every day, it's not a system. It's dependence in disguise. 2. He built around wisdom, not emotion. Solomon didn't rely on hype. He relied on insight. He understood that moods change, culture shifts, but principle, that endures. So he codified wisdom into patterns, into structure, into frameworks that outlasted his generation. You can see it in Proverbs. They aren't just religious poetry, they're mental architecture. Phrases like, "A fool spends whatever he gets." "The borrower is slave to the due." "Lender." "Without vision, the people perish." These aren't tweets. They're system design principles hidden in ancient language. Solomon didn't just teach truth, he turned truth into policy. And that's why his empire didn't collapse when he slept. 3. He reinvested in structure before luxury. While most people spend their first increase on display, Solomon built defense, logistics, trade routes, resource management. He didn't decorate his life first, he fortified it. That's wealth. It's not just what you have. It's how long it lasts when you're not watching. Ask yourself, do you have rituals that protect your time? Systems that move while you rest? Automations that preserve your focus? People empowered to act without your permission? If not, you don't have a kingdom. You have chaos with a bank account. 4. He multiplied through connection, not just collection. Solomon was a master of alliances, not just military, but intellectual, economic, spiritual. He brought thinkers, craftsmen, architects, foreign rulers into his orbit, not to compete, but to collaborate. He understood. Wealth isn't hoarded, it's harmonized. He wasn't intimidated by brilliance. He created space for it. He elevated others because he knew when the minds around you rise, your kingdom does too. And today, you can replicate that. Your kingdom might be your business, your content, your team, your family. But the principle is the same. Don't just collect resources, connect them. Let systems speak too. Systems. Let value speak without you. That's when wealth becomes exponential. 5. He protected the flow, not just the finish. Solomon didn't just measure what came in. He studied how it moved, where it leaked, where it bottlenecked, where it got stuck. Because flow creates expansion. Stagnation creates erosion. Your attention, your time, your money, they all follow this law. Track the flow. Where is your energy leaking? Where are your habits blocking your own expansion? Where are you spending? To feel better instead of build better. This is what structure reveals. Because you can't improve what you don't measure, and you can't sustain what you don't structure. Here's the hard truth. Most people burn out not because they did too much, but because they tried to hold everything themselves. You weren't built to be your own infrastructure. You were built to design it. Solomon knew this, and that's why his wealth wasn't fragile, because he built like a king, not like a freelancer. He didn't ask, how can I get more? He asked, how can this run without me? And you can start asking the same. It starts small, with routines, with automations, with boundaries, with documentation, with the decision to stop being the worker and start being the architect. So when you rest, the vision keeps moving. That's not fantasy. That's infrastructure. That's the secret. And that's where we go next. Because Solomon didn't just build and protect, he transferred. And in the next section, we'll explore the generational model he established, the one you were never supposed to access. Let's unlock it. Everyone talks about getting rich. Almost no one talks about staying rich or passing it forward. Because there's a difference between building wealth and building something that outlives you. And Solomon knew that from the start. His empire wasn't measured by the size of his palace. It was measured by how many generations it could empower, even in his absence. That's not just wealth, that's legacy. And legacy is the final form of leverage. You see, modern culture teaches you to live for the now. YOLO. Treat yourself. Get the bag. And while you're spending for applause, someone else is designing for inheritance. Solomon wasn't obsessed with flexing. He was obsessed with flowing wisdom through bloodlines. He didn't just build systems. He embedded those systems into culture, into memory. Because wealth doesn't last through money alone. It lasts through mentality. The true inheritance isn't gold, it's perspective. Solomon could have handed his son silver and called it a day, but he handed him something deeper, a worldview, a strategy, a filter for decision-making, a standard for truth. That's what Proverbs was. Not just literature, but invisible inheritance. Lines like, "The lazy man's cravings will be his ruin. Wisdom is more precious than rubies. Guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it." That's not fluff. That's multi-generational. Software, passed through word, embedded in thought, reinforced in rhythm. And that's what most families today are missing. They pass trauma, not tools. They pass survival, not strategy. They pass fear, not frameworks. And then they wonder why the cycle repeats. Wealth is passed invisibly long before it's passed financially. Let me tell you something most schools never will. The average millionaire doesn't just have multiple income streams, they have a lineage of patterns that support expansion. They talk about investing at the dinner table. They discuss ideas in car rides. They ask questions like, if you had $10,000, what would you build with it? Instead of, what job do you want when you grow up? Subtle, right? But that's the point. Wealth isn't passed in grand lectures, it's passed in moments, micro-conversations, shared language, normalized risk. And Solomon? He normalized wisdom. He normalized strategy. He normalized abundance rooted in clarity, not chaos. Now ask yourself, what did you inherit? What tone was money discussed in at your table? Was it fear? Was it stress? Was it silence? Did you learn to shrink your desires so others would feel comfortable? Did you watch your parents survive and call it strength? That's not legacy. That's inherited limitation. And unless you rewrite that code, you'll pass it forward too. Not because you want to, but because unchallenged programming becomes generational truth, until someone says, it stops with me. We build different now. We speak different now. We multiply different now. That someone is you. Because here's the secret. You don't have to come from legacy to build one. You don't need old money to build new systems. You just need to decide that the cycle ends with you. And the moment you do, you start thinking differently. You stop asking, what can I buy? And start asking, what can I transfer? What will remain after I'm gone? What will they remember? Not just about me, but because of me? That's the real shift. Because you stop building for validation and start building for transformation. You stop thinking like a consumer. You start thinking like a foundation. Solomon's greatest wealth wasn't what he kept. It was what he transferred, without needing to be present. That's where power lives. That's where leverage lives. That's where kings build. And you? You don't need a crown. You need commitment to patterns, to perspective, to practices that will make your children and their children thank you, not just for what you gave them, but for what you broke so they didn't have to. Let this hit deep. The wealthiest thing you may ever do is rebuild the blueprint they gave you broken. And yes, it's heavy. Yes, it's lonely. Yes, you'll be misunderstood. But they don't need to understand you. They'll benefit from what you build anyway. And that's what Solomon did. He built something bigger than his ego, longer than his reign, wider than his name. And that's the assignment now, not just wealth, but waves. Waves that ripple through time, systems, bloodlines, and decisions. Waves that say, someone woke up, someone built, someone passed more than pain. And when that happens, you don't just create a legacy, you become one. Let's keep going. Because Solomon didn't stop there. He also knew something almost no one talks about. What happens inside you the moment you stop performing for the system? And that's where we go next. Not the external building, but the internal war, the one you've been avoiding. But now, you're ready to win it. There's a moment after the awakening, and it's the one no one prepares you for. It doesn't come with applause. It doesn't feel like triumph. It doesn't feel like peace. It feels like grief. Not because you lost something, but because you started to see clearly everything you've been carrying that was never yours. And now you're standing in the middle of an internal battlefield, not between good and evil, but between the version of you that was trained to obey and the one who's finally ready to build. You feel the pull of both. The silence of the system still whispers, be grateful. Don't aim too high. Play it safe. And at the same time, something louder is waking up. A voice that doesn't ask for permission anymore. A voice that says, let it burn. Let them misunderstand. Let's go. That's the rupture. That's the sacred violence of becoming. And Solomon went through it too. You think he just asked for wisdom and then relaxed? No. He was thrust into complexity, into decisions, into power dynamics, betrayals, responsibilities, self-doubt, pressure. But he chose to build anyway, because that's what builders do. They move through the storm, not around it. And now it's your turn. Let's name the war you're feeling. Let's stop spiritualizing confusion and call it what it is. A collapse of the familiar self. The self that was trained to be accepted. The self that was rewarded for staying quiet. The self that learned to smile through suffocation. The self that only asked for just enough and called that humility. That self is dying, and that's good, because what's being born isn't louder, it's clearer. You're not becoming arrogant. You're becoming unshakable. You're not becoming cold. You're becoming selective. And yes, it will cost you. People will say you've changed. They're right. You outgrew the version of yourself they were comfortable managing. And when they can't define you anymore, they'll start to resent your movement. Don't shrink. This is what Solomon understood. True wisdom isolates before it elevates. Because when you begin to see clearly, you'll lose the people who loved your blindness. You'll feel crazy, like you're too much, too intense, too ambitious, too awake. You're not. You're just surrounded by people still inside the matrix. And now you don't fit. That's not rejection. That's release. You're being pulled out of spaces that celebrated your silence and now resent your vision. Let them go, because every revolution begins with exile, and exile is where you meet yourself. Solomon didn't rule to be liked. He ruled because he carried something heavier than approval, an assignment, and you carry one too. But first you must confront the final lie, that safety comes from standing still. It doesn't. Safety is an illusion sold to the obedient, and obedience is the currency of small lives. You weren't made to survive. You were made to restructure reality. But to do that, you have to kill the parts of you that only knew how to perform. The over-explainer, the people-pleaser, the self-doubter, the version of you that needed the algorithm, the applause, the external signal to feel valid. Kill it, with grace, with love, but without mercy, because that self got you here, but it can't take you forward. This is the wilderness. This is the silence before structure. This is where Solomon stood alone before building a kingdom that carried his name across centuries. And here's the paradox. The deeper you go inward, the more external clarity you gain. You stop building for visibility. You start building for vibration. You stop asking who's watching. You start asking what's true. And when that becomes your compass, you become terrifying to the system, because you can't be sold anymore. You can't be shamed anymore. You can't be distracted anymore. You become a signal, not a spectator. You become Solomon, not in robes and thrones, but in architecture. Mental, emotional, financial, spiritual. And yes, it will feel lonely. But what's waiting on the other side of this tension is something deeper than belonging. It's sovereignty. It's the ability to build your own table and decide who eats at it. No more shrinking to be digestible. Now you expand and let the world recalibrate around your truth. This is what the next phase requires, and it's where we go next, from internal alignment to external execution. Because Solomon didn't just awaken, he acted. And now it's your turn. Let's build. You've done the hard part. You woke up. You tore the script. You stood in the silence most people run from. Now comes the part that separates the awakened from the architects. Execution. Because clarity without action is just spiritual entertainment. And Solomon didn't stop at wisdom. He built with it. He didn't just pray. He planned. He systematized. He documented. He mobilized. He took invisible revelation and turned it into a structure visible across continents. And that's your next move. Because now that your identity has shifted, your energy needs direction. And if you don't give your energy an outlet, you'll return to the old patterns just to feel motion again. So let's get tactical. Start with what you know, then structure it. You don't need another course. You don't need a perfect brand. You don't need permission. You need to take what you've lived, survived, built, or mastered, and package it into something that moves without you. That's the principle Solomon understood. What you can teach, you can multiply. What you can repeat, you can automate. What you can organize, you can scale. Most people think they need more qualifications. Solomon thought in terms of replication. So ask yourself, what do people come to you for? What pain have you already solved? What knowledge are you sitting on that others are drowning without? That's not trivia. That's value. And value, when structured, becomes a system. And a system? That's the beginning of sovereignty. Stop trading time, start engineering leverage. The broke version of you was taught to earn per hour. The awakened you must now learn to earn per structure. That means building things that don't require your presence 24/7. A digital product, a content ecosystem, a consulting framework, a licensing model, a resource library, a performance-based offer, a recurring income stream. It doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to begin. Because wealth doesn't reward talent, it rewards iteration. Most people never get wealthy because they think too much. Solomon didn't wait for certainty. He moved with alignment and refined through momentum. You can do the same. Create, launch, measure, refine, scale. That's the rhythm of builders. Build your infrastructure before you need it. You won't rise to your level of vision. You'll fall to your level of systems. So ask, does my calendar reflect my calling? Does my morning routine protect my clarity? Does my tech stack serve my mission or distract me from it? Does my circle reinforce my movement or pull me back to survival? You don't need more time. You need better architecture. Solomon ruled a kingdom with layers of responsibility, but he wasn't burnt out because he trusted his system more than his strength. Do the same. Automate decisions, batch energy, eliminate distractions, outsource chaos. Guard your focus like a vault, because clarity without boundaries is just vulnerability dressed as inspiration. And what you don't protect dies. Understand that value flows where structure lives. Let's be blunt. The world doesn't pay you for being gifted. It pays you for building pathways that deliver transformation. Solomon's value wasn't that he was wise. It was that he structured wisdom into policies, proverbs, judgments, and systems that moved nations. You can do the same with whatever you carry. Turn your lived experience into a deliverable. Turn your pain into a protocol. Turn your story into structure. Don't just inspire, design pathways, because the people you're meant to serve don't just need your vibe, they need your method, and that's where your legacy begins. Let's be clear, execution isn't sexy, it's not glamorous, it won't go viral, but it builds what fame can't fake, infrastructure that prints freedom. And Solomon? He never asked the people to clap, he asked them to contribute. He mobilized minds, he directed resources. He converted revelation into replication. That's real power. Not just knowing the way, mappa, but paving it for others. And now, that's your role. You're no longer the student. You're the system builder. You're no longer looking for breakthrough. You're engineering capacity. And yes, it's tedious, yes, it's technical, yes, it'll stretch you, but it's worth it. Because the work you do now in silence becomes the structure they will follow in storm. So stop waiting for confidence. Start building with conviction. Solomon didn't wait for motivation. He moved with mandate. You carry that same fire now. So aim it, shape it, sustain it. And soon, we'll talk about what happens when you've built enough to rise above the noise. Because the next phase isn't creation, it's ascension. Let's move. This is the part no one talks about. The part after the strategy, after the breakthrough, after the decision to build. The part where the noise fades and the silence sets in. Because when you start walking the path of clarity, you start losing the noise that kept you company. The opinions, the approval, the applause, the chaos that once gave you cover. And now, you're exposed, visible to yourself in a way you've never been, and invisible to the people who used to understand you. That's the cost of clarity, that's the cost of ascent. Solomon didn't build a throne by following the crowd. He built it by mastering the silence they were afraid to sit in. You'll feel it too. The moments where it's easier to go back, to be relatable, to shrink, to explain yourself so they'll be comfortable again. But you can't, because what you're building now requires a version of you that no longer apologizes for being different. You're no longer chasing inclusion. You're carving altitude. And at this altitude, there's less oxygen, less validation, less distraction, but there's more vision, more authority, more sovereignty. That's what Solomon understood. The higher you rise, the quieter it gets, because the view is reserved for the few. And that's where you are now, in the space where every decision is a brick, where every hour is a seed, where every moment of doubt is met not with fear, but with framework. You've stopped performing, you've started building, and now you're becoming a signal, not just to the world, but to yourself, a reminder of what's possible when a human being refuses to play small, a reminder of what happens when someone says, "I don't need to be chosen. I already decided. I don't need a map, I became the cartographer. I don't need a savior, I became the structure." You've entered the phase where action becomes identity, where repetition becomes ritual, where movement becomes memory. And legacy becomes inevitable. Because here's what they never tell you. The world doesn't change when you go viral. It changes when you go unshakable, when your focus is deeper than their doubt, when your silence is stronger than their noise, when your structure is more consistent than their criticism. And when that happens, something sacred begins. You stop trying to prove anything. You just keep building, brick by brick, word by word, offer by offer, decision by decision. And one day, they'll point to your name, your company, your family, your digital footprint, and say, "That's when everything changed." But you'll know. It started here, in the silence, in the stretch, in the surrender, in the moment you finally remembered who you were before they trained you to forget. So what now? Now you build anyway, even when it's quiet, even when it's heavy, even when no one claps, because the builder in you no longer needs permission, only a plan, and the discipline to follow through. You're not just building wealth, you're building architecture of identity, something your future self can live inside, something your children can inherit, something the world can never cancel, corrupt, or contain. This is what Solomon hid in plain sight, not just gold or wisdom or rituals, but a pattern of how to become unbreakable. And now you carry it, so go. Design your system, launch the offer, document the method, multiply the truth. The algorithm is not your gatekeeper. The market is not your god. The noise is not your compass. You are your strategy, you are your structure, you are the signal. Now move. There's a shift that happens when you stop being the seeker and become the source. It doesn't come with trumpets. It comes with stillness. Not the kind that feels passive, but the kind that feels like a storm has passed and the ground is solid beneath your feet for the first time. You've crossed something invisible, a line most never even know exists. And on the other side, you don't look for answers anymore. You become a living embodiment of them. You don't beg for strategies. You recognize your habits are strategies. You don't chase freedom. You recognize your clarity is freedom. That's what Solomon knew. That's what you're stepping into now. You are not the same person who pressed play on this video, the one who watched in silence, unsure, the one who wrestled with belief, with doubt, with identity. That person was necessary, but they're not coming with you, because now you're no longer just waking up, you're walking awake. You don't ask for permission to build, you just start. You don't check if your vision fits in the current trend. You set the tone. You don't dilute your voice to be digestible. You speak, and let those meant to hear it find you. That's the power of internal consolidation. It's not ego, it's rooted authority. The kind of authority that moves quietly but shakes structures. The kind that doesn't need noise to be effective. The kind that Solomon walked in. And the kind the system still fears to this day. Because let's be honest, the world doesn't fear the loud. It fears the disciplined. The ones who show up after the applause fades. The ones who stay consistent without a spotlight. The ones who build frameworks while others build followers. You are now that person. Not because you say so, but because your rhythm proves it. Your habits hold the evidence. Your structure holds the proof. Your calendar tells the truth about your priorities. Your silence no longer equals hesitation. It equals focus. That's identity, not performance, not branding, not posturing, just deep, settled alignment. So what comes next? Leadership. Not the loud kind, not the ego-driven kind, but the kind. That changes bloodlines. You lead now, even if no one calls you leader, even if no one claps, even if no one follows whilst at first, because real leadership isn't about followers, it's about formation, forming systems, forming language, forming capacity, forming solutions. You don't wait for an audience, you build an altar, and you speak from there. That's what Solomon did. He led with vision before he ever had a throne, and now, so do you. Let this sink in. You no longer live in reaction. You live in design. You are no longer trying to escape a system. You are becoming the system. Your mindset is now architecture. Your energy is now currency. Your choices are now blueprints. Your presence is now a signal to others still asleep. You are the new map. And yes, and that's heavy, because now you carry responsibility, not just to succeed, but to sustain what you're building, to protect your clarity, to fortify your structure, to honor the rhythm that brought you here. That's legacy in motion. But remember, you don't need to do it fast. You just need to do it faithfully. You don't need to impress. You need to integrate. You don't need external validation. You need internal continuity. Because the longer you walk in this identity, the more unshakable you become. And the more unshakable you become, the less noise you need, the less applause you crave, the less fear you carry. And what's left? Vision, action, structure, truth, the 4 pillars of sovereignty, the 4 patterns Solomon left behind, hidden in his kingdom, buried in his words, revealed only to those bold enough to listen beyond the surface. You've heard them now. You've seen them. You've embodied them. So carry them. Carry them in your schedule. Carry them in your business. Carry them in your parenting. Carry them in how you speak, how you post, how you rest. Because your identity is no longer a question. It's a pattern of presence. And from this point forward, you don't ask who you are. You just show the world what someone aligned with purpose looks like. Brick by brick, truth by truth, day by day, you've arrived. Not at the end of the video, but at the edge of a new self. You don't need more advice. You don't need more theories. You don't even need more motivation. What you need is already inside you now, and the world will feel different. Not because it changed, but because you did. You'll hear the same noise, but it won't pull you. You'll see the same distractions, but they won't stick. You'll face the same resistance, but you won't flinch. Because now you've been exposed to a truth they buried deep, that real wealth isn't loud. It's layered. It's constructed. It's protected by clarity, scaled by systems, and passed through silence. Solomon didn't wear his power. He walked in it. And now, so do you. You are no longer the product of someone else's programming. You are the author of your rhythm, the architect of your world, the signal others are waiting to see in motion. This isn't just knowledge, it's blueprint, and blueprints are sacred. They guide builders, not spectators. You were never meant to perform for this world. You were meant to restructure it with your ideas, with your frameworks, with your boundaries, with your posture, with your presence, because presence is the most expensive currency left, and you now spend it with precision. So what happens next? You keep building. You rise in silence. You make peace with being misunderstood. You trade speed for stamina. And you carry your blueprint like a torch through a world still trying to keep people asleep. And while they sell noise, you embody order. While they rush, you refine. While they seek validation, you hold vibration. This is the new identity, not a louder version of who you were, but a quieter embodiment of who you've always been. And from this day forward, you don't perform. You transmit. You don't chase. You construct. You don't escape. You design exits for others. That's how revolutions begin. Not with riots, but with someone who remembers their assignment and executes it without needing to be seen. Because Solomon didn't just build to impress, he built to endure. He built to protect. He built so his wisdom would outlive his reign. And now his structure speaks through time. Let the same be said of you. Let your silence speak volumes. Let your consistency echo for decades. Let your children and their children say, they didn't just survive, they built. They didn't just learn, they transferred. They didn't just talk, they transmitted truth into time. You are now the living legacy, no longer conditioned, no longer performing, no longer programmable. You became the system. Now move like it. What part of this blueprint shook you the most? What belief did you bury, and what structure are you ready to build? Like this video if you felt the shift. It tells the algorithm this message matters and brings it to those still trapped in silence. Subscribe if you're done surviving and ready to structure your sovereignty. New frameworks drop weekly. Share this with someone still walking in circles, someone who's ready to remember who they really are. Because we don't just talk here, we build, we transmit, we multiply, and this message was never meant to end with you. It's a seed. Pass it on.